common humanity, truth, context. At moments like this, all of these things become deemed controversial, extreme, distasteful, or even repulsive. Now, to begin, no cause on earth, no cause justifies the slaughter of innocent civilians. And Hamas's sadistic murder of partygoers and kibbutzniks was an outrage. It's impossible to understand the terror which defined the last moments of those who were killed, the trauma of those who survived, and the all-consuming grief of the loved ones left behind. The right to resist occupation does exist under international law, but that does not include deliberately targeting civilian life. Now, the same basic commitment to innocent civilian life, to protecting it that I just expressed, that applies, or should apply, to Gaza, to Palestinians. But, in truth, it doesn't. Now, if asked, the vast majority of people would say that human life is of equal worth regardless of nationality, ethnicity, or religion, but we have to be honest here. In practice, many just do not believe this. Some deaths matter far more than others. This is known as a hierarchy of death, and Palestinians are near the bottom. This is the inevitable consequence always of occupation and colonization. When European states subjugated their colonies, they rationalized that subjugation by stripping their colonial subjects of their humanity. They were lesser, inferior people and thus could be treated as such. Now, believing that some people's lives are inherently inferior is racism. And we should say that loud and clear because anti-Palestinian racism is rampant, unchallenged and respectable. Now, however this current nightmarish episode ends, there is only one certainty, and that is far more Palestinians will die and be maimed. This has been an absolute iron rule and certainty in decades of occupation. Context. It's that word I used at the beginning. Context is what gets viciously attacked at moments like this. Context, truth is deemed to be apologism for evil. It isn't. Without context, without truth, there is no understanding of why terrible things happen in this world and why there is no hope of preventing them from happening over and over again. Now let's just listen to a little bit of this CNN interview with the Palestinian activist Mustafa Baghotti.
But I think this situation that has evolved is a direct result of the continuation of the longest occupation in modern history. Israeli occupation of Palestinian land since 1967. This is 56 years of occupation that has transformed into a system of apartheid, a much worse apartheid than what prevailed in South Africa. Maybe Hamas did not recognize Israel, but the PLO did, and the Palestinian Authority did. What did they get? Nothing. Since 2014, the Israeli governments would not even meet with Palestinians. And what you see today is a reaction to several things. First of all, settlers' terrorist attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank that has evicted already 20 communities in an act of ethnic cleansing. 248 Palestinians who were killed by the Israeli army and settlers in the West Bank, including 40 children. Attacks on the holy sites, the Muslim and Christian holy sites by Israeli extremists, as well as declaration of Netanyahu that he will liquidate the Palestinian rights and the Palestinian cause by normalization with Arab countries. And he dared even to go to the United Nations and carried in the United Nations a map of Israel, which included the whole of the West Bank, all of Gaza, all of Jerusalem, as well as the Golan Heights. He declared the annexation of the occupied territories. So, of course, Palestinians turn to resistance.
Now, if we don't talk about the decades-long occupation, if we don't talk about apartheid, and Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and Israeli human rights organisation B'Tselem have all called this apartheid, if we don't talk about the theft of Palestinian land and its illegal colonisation by Israeli settlers, if we don't talk about the 248 Palestinian civilians, including 40 children killed by Israeli forces and settlers alone this year before the current violence began, then yes, horrors like this will seem to suddenly appear like lightning from a clear blue sky, but that is not the truth. Take those 248 Palestinian civilians and kids. Did you even know about them? Be honest. Did you know about them? Did you know they existed? I don't think you did, in all honesty, and that isn't your fault, because there is almost no interest in those deaths. There is no meaningful coverage of what happened to them because Palestinian life is simply not deemed to be of any worth or importance, and what's more, we all know it. Indeed, between January 2008 and September 2023, out of 1,715 deaths in Israel and Palestine, 95% were Palestinian and 4.6% were Israeli. Out of 158,867 injuries, 4% Israeli, 96 Palestinian. But you know that the horror and condemnation for this overwhelming proportion of Palestinian deaths and injuries is simply not there. They are not regarded as human beings like you and me, and if they were, their deaths would not be tolerated. Now listen to this justified outrage from Humzan Zomlot, the head of the Palestinian mission to the UK, on the BBC.
And the mainstream media for 75 years. You bring us here whenever there are Israelis who are killed. Did you bring me here when many Palestinians in the West Bank, more than 200 over the last few months? Do you invite me when there is such Israeli provocations in Jerusalem and elsewhere? Because what Israelis have seen, which we started by saying tragic, the last 48 hours, the Palestinians see every day for the last 50 years. You know the situation in Gaza, you've just described it. This is the biggest open-air prison.
Well, he's right. He's obviously right. The media interest appears when there are Israeli deaths, but not when Palestinian life is taken away. And of course, there should be coverage and condemnation of the horrors inflicted on those innocent Israeli civilians. What of the Palestinian life? That's the question we have to ask. Let's talk about Gaza. Context. Let's talk about Gaza. Half its population are kids, children, kids. Kids like those kids down your road who kick footballs down the street, who cross zebra crossings on the way to school. In Gaza, hungry kids, desperate kids. 80% of Gaza's population rely on international humanitarian aid just to survive. It is the world's largest open-air prison, subjected to a 16-year-long blockade from air, land and sea, access to food, water, work, amenities, all controlled by Israel. Desperate, intolerable conditions. And under international law as such, Gaza remains regarded as under Israeli occupation. And in that spirit, let's listen to Labour's Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, on the BBC.
Well, no, there are some here. There are certainly people outside this conference, at the conference down the road, so-called World Transform Conference of the Left, who will say, look, we all know the real problem here. The real cause, they say, is the occupation of what they call Palestine.
Well, Gaza is not occupied by Israel. The real cause of what is happening now is a terrorist attack.
Firstly, what is the BBC presenter Nick Robinson saying here? What they call Palestine. It is called Palestine. This is its name. Now that itself is a not too subtle attempt, in my view, to make even accepting the concept of Palestine as somehow controversial or extreme. Contested. Now, what Reeves says here is wrong. It is false. And she's either ignorant, in which case she should remain silent about this issue until she educates herself, or she is dishonest. Listen here to the spokesperson for the UN Secretary General explaining the official position.
Under resolutions adopted by both the Security Council and the General Assembly on the Middle East peace process, the Gaza Strip continues to be regarded as part of the occupied Palestinian territory.
Now let's listen to the BBC correspondent, Lise Doucet.
Why is it happening now? Some would say they know they're going to suffer. The people of Gaza will suffer. I've asked that today, and they said it has got so bad. We are so suffocated. We have nothing left to lose.
Now, it's striking when you hear the tone of BBC correspondents who've actually been on the ground in Gaza and witnessed the conditions. What Lise Doucet is saying here is not in support of what Hamas did, and it would be defamatory to suggest otherwise. She's providing context. This is how people have been left to feel in Gaza, and these conditions are what make what happened on Saturday possible. And now even greater horrors are to come. Listen now to the Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant.
We are imposing a complete siege on Gaza. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything will be closed. We are fighting against human animals, and we are acting accordingly.
Now let's be clear, these words, what's been uttered here, are on one level collective punishment. That is illegal under international law. What he's speaking about there is commitment to a war crime. It's also the language of genocide. That is genocidal language. And we all know it. Human animals, you say this to justify doing anything and everything to those you're going to inflict suffering upon. Now, Netanyahu has already said that the people of Gaza must leave because of what is to be unleashed, but there is nowhere to escape. They cannot get out. There is nowhere to go. Listen now to our Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly.
In terms of the Israeli response, do you think it is proportionate for Israel to cut off water, electricity, food, fuel, all of those things to the people of Gaza.
Israel has a right to defend itself against attack. The UK completely supports Israel's right to defend itself proportionately. The truth of the matter is that this was a terrorist attack perpetrated by Hamas, who are embedded in Gaza, shielding themselves amongst the Palestinian people in Gaza. And we will continue to support Israel as it seeks to defend itself against this brutal terrorist attack initiated by Hamas.
So there you have it. The official position of the British government is to support war crimes. That's what he's saying here. Culpability for the atrocities which will now undoubtedly be committed in the coming days, weeks and months will be shared with Western governments. Israel is their ally, armed and backed by them, just as the future of the Palestinian people has been disregarded by them. And now some will try to absolve themselves of cheering on this bloodbath by simply blaming Hamas and claiming that Hamas is responsible for all the coming bloodshed and all the lives that will be lost. No, it's not true. Every atrocity committed by the Israeli state is a choice, and their bullets and bombs will kill civilians, including children. Now let's listen. Let me read out to what the editorial board of the Israeli newspaper Haaretz said. They said that the disaster that befell Israel on the holiday of Simchat Torah is the clear responsibility of one person, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister who's prided himself on his vast political experience and irreplaceable wisdom in security matters, completely failed to identify the dangers he was consciously leading Israel into when establishing a government of annexation and dispossession, when appointing Bezalel, Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir to key positions while embracing a foreign policy that openly ignored the existence and rights of Palestine. This is true, of course, but if someone like myself or a British politician had written something like this in this climate, can you imagine what would have been said about them? All of this will end only when Jews and Arabs alike have security and control over their own futures. The problem remains that only Israel's security is understood and respected. There is no official acceptance that Palestinians deserve security of any sort. At moments like this, defending common humanity becomes controversial, deemed even extreme, that Israeli and Palestinian civilian lives are of equal worth and that every death is to be equally mourned, which is the position, the basic position, that should inform any commentary on this issue. But truth and context will and are being dismissed as apologism. Well, that makes it all the more important to defend humanity and truth, and that means opposing Israel's Western-backed onslaught on Gaza, opposing every civilian death and demanding a lasting peace which accepts Palestinian freedom and Israelis' security cannot be divorced. And when we hear talk of how this has set back peace, this is what British politicians are saying. Barefaced lies. There was no prospect of any peace as things stood. The Israeli government has no intention whatsoever of ever tolerating an independent Palestinian state and will simply continue to squeeze Palestinian nationhood out of any existence while stealing and colonising their land. Now finally, don't let the horrors of this world rot your humanity away, because without it you are lost. As soon as you become numb to the pain and suffering and death of your fellow innocent human beings, you have descended into a dark, dark place. That is the precondition, that feeling, to all the misery which humans have imposed upon each other as long as we have existed as a species. And there is a consensus on that defence of human life when Hamas commits an atrocity, but it does not exist when it comes to Palestinian life. And that is what allows the coming horrors to happen. So yes, of course, mourn every single innocent life. And without that, your humanity's gone. Let's just be clear what is about to happen. What's going to happen is, with Western support, a brutal onslaught on Palestinians whose future has already been destroyed by a Western-backed Israeli state. And unless we speak out as Western citizens whose governments are going to be complicit in the horrors to come, then we ourselves are rendered complicit. So it's time to speak out. Please like, subscribe, do support the channel on patreon.com/owenjones84, and I'll see you in a bit.